Ladies and gentlemen, imagine the year 1860. A middle-class American merchant walks down a busy street, reaches into his wallet, and pulls out dozens of different banknotes. Each note carries its own value, fluctuating daily based on the distance from its issuing bank. A $10 bill printed in New York might be accepted at near face value in Boston thanks to a sophisticated private clearing system. But when taken to Ohio, it is discounted by 10 to 30%. And in remote parts of Michigan, that same bill becomes nearly worthless, as it originated from a Wildcat bank, where the banker might even use silver-plated lead bars to deceive inspectors. Yet the American economy boomed. The Transcontinental Railroad took shape. The California gold rush of 1849 attracted hundreds of thousands. Industrialization spread, and the western frontier constantly expanded. A nation had been independent for nearly 90 years, yet it still lacked a unified national currency. How could that happen? In reality, the monetary system of that era rested on a solid foundation of precious metals, gold, and silver, alongside foreign coins, especially Spanish and Mexican silver coins known as pillar dollars, which were widely accepted. Besides these, there were thousands of types of banknotes issued by state banks. There was no central bank, nor was there federal legal tender. The market self-regulated through discount mechanisms and private clearing systems. In New England, the Suffolk system operated so effectively that banknotes from member banks largely retained their value across wide areas. Thanks to fierce competition and strict local oversight, the economy still achieved impressive growth. But behind this surface efficiency lie major questions that still haunt us today. Which money did Americans of that time truly trust in their daily lives, and why? Why did a nation born from a revolution against the centralized financial power of the Bank of England delay creating a unified national currency for decades? And when the Civil War erupted, how did that very conflict forced the United States to completely redesign its monetary system? In doing so, what limits did it reveal between individual liberty, states' rights, and the need for national unity? This was a profound conflict between two schools of thought. On one side, the Jacksonian tradition, always wary of a centralized bank monster determined to protect hard money and state autonomy. On the other side, the urgent practical needs of a continental economy undergoing rapid industrialization demanding seamless payments and stable credit to build the nation. Was the lack of a national currency a beautiful symbol of true democratic freedom? Or was it the invisible barrier that fragmented domestic trade and deepened regional inequality, the industrial Northeast versus the agrarian South and the Western frontier? To understand why Americans at the time trusted or doubted those diverse banknotes, and why they were eventually forced to abandon the old system, we need to turn back the clock to the founding principles and the dramatic experiment of the collapsos. Free banking era. Dear viewers, if today's introduction gives you a fresh and interesting perspective on American financial history, please give us a like and subscribe to the Financial State Secrets channel today so you do not miss the next episodes. Thank you for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, we have just seen the chaotic yet vibrant picture of the monetary system before 1863. To understand its origins, we must return to the early years of the young republic. After gaining independence, the United States quickly faced a painful lesson from the continental currency. Reckless printing caused this currency to lose almost all value, becoming a symbol of financial chaos. That very trauma was deeply etched into the 1787 Constitution. The Founding Fathers only granted Congress the power to coin money and regulate the value of domestic and foreign currency. The phrasing was intentionally vague to strictly limit the issuance of banknotes, as they feared inflation and the excessive concentration of power, a terrifying legacy from the Bank of England that they had once opposed. In that context, control over banking and banknote issuance largely remained in the hands of the states. Alexander Hamilton, with a vision of a strong and unified nation, created the first Bank of the United States in 1791. This bank aimed to provide national credit stability and assist in paying off war debts. However, it faced fierce opposition from the Jeffersonian faction, who feared that a centralized financial institution would become a tool for elite domination. After the financial chaos of the War of 1812, the Second Bank of the United States was established in 1816, but its fate was no better. President Andrew Jackson, a symbol of populist spirit, called it a corrupt, many-headed monster. He vetoed its charter renewal in 1832 and later ordered the withdrawal of all government deposits in 1833. By 1836, the Second Bank officially closed its journey. This event opened a new era, the free banking era. The underlying philosophy was clear and profound. Hamilton represented the aspiration to build a powerful nation where a central bank played a key role in stabilizing currency, promoting trade, and financing major goals. Conversely, Jackson and the Jacksonian Democrats expressed deep faith in populism and anti-monopoly sentiment. They viewed centralized banking as a weapon for the Eastern elite, directly threatening the freedom of ordinary citizens and the autonomy of the states. Therefore, after the Second Bank collapsed, the free banking model was strongly promoted. From 1837, especially with the New York Law of 1838 as a template. Anyone meeting minimum requirements, primarily secured by state bonds, could establish a bank. The clear goal was to prevent the formation of a moneyed aristocracy, keep the currency tightly tethered to tangible assets, and maintain real power at the local level rather than concentrating it in Washington. Regarding operational mechanisms, banknotes issued by state banks were essentially the bank's own private debt, promising to exchange them for gold and silver when citizens demanded. There was no common design and no guarantee from the federal government. Legal tender remained primarily gold, silver, and foreign coins. Clever private solutions like the Suffolk system in New England or the New York Clearing House in 1853 helped stabilize payments in certain regions. This entire design was not coincidental, but a deliberate political choice. The Founding Fathers and their successors wanted to limit the power of the central government, willing to accept the risk of fragmentation to protect the spirit of democracy and individual liberty, a decision that deeply reflected the historical fear of financial overreach. As you can see, the monetary system was not just an economic issue, but a clear manifestation of the struggle between two visions for America, one of strong unity and the other of radical local liberty. And these cracks from the original design would gradually become apparent as the country entered a phase of more rapid development. From those profound philosophical choices, the state banking system gradually operated and reached its peak. This was a period that clearly demonstrated both the intense vitality of free market competition and the unavoidable cracks caused by fragmentation. Banks operated based on a simple but effective principle. They issued banknotes backed by their own capital and pledged assets, primarily state bonds or real estate. Profits came from lending these banknotes at reasonable interest rates, along with service fees. Payments and exchanges were conducted through networks of correspondent banks and private clearing systems. In the New England region, the Suffolk system achieved a remarkable feat. Participating banks had to maintain specific reserves, in return for which their notes were accepted at near face value throughout the region. The failure rate here was significantly lower than in many other places, proving the strength of self-regulation and community oversight. On a broader scale, the market self-regulated through discount mechanisms. Banknotes from weak or remote banks were naturally discounted, creating a strong incentive for each bank to strive to build and maintain its reputation. Let us imagine a few real-life stories to see how this system worked. A merchant in Boston around 1850 could receive banknotes from a bank in New York or Philadelphia and use them at nearly face value thanks to a smoothly operating private payment network. Conversely, a migrant or settler in the Midwest in the 1840s often faced a completely different situation. They might receive Wildcat notes, banknotes from Wildcat banks with rustic names like Red Dog, Wildcat, or Catamount. Many notes were heavily discounted or even flatly refused due to doubts about their ability to be redeemed for gold or silver. The peak of both strength and fragility was the Panic of 1857. As panic spread, citizens rushed to withdraw their money, and many banks were forced to temporarily suspend the redemption of gold and silver. Yet the system gradually recovered without major intervention from the federal government. This both proved its incredible ability to self-regulate and clearly exposed a fatal weakness, the lack of a lender of last resort at the national level. Overall, this model brought many important benefits. Flexible credit strongly promoted the expansion of the frontier, the construction of transportation infrastructure, and the development of domestic trade. Especially in New England, the banking system was considered among the most stable and advanced in the world at that time. It effectively protected local autonomy, sparked a strong entrepreneurial spirit, and avoided the situation where a few institutions were too big to fail. Each state and each community had the ability to partially determine its own financial destiny. However, behind this dynamic appearance, limitations became increasingly evident. Information about the actual health of banks in remote areas was difficult to obtain, leading to a state of serious asymmetry. Counterfeiting was common, while some states managed their banks loosely, allowing some to print money beyond their capacity. As a result, local inflation occurred frequently. Cross-regional trade was heavily hindered by value discrepancies and high risks. Inequality also became clear. Farmers on the frontier and ordinary laborers suffered much more than urban merchants who easily accessed reputable banknotes. The entire system lacked a lender of last resort at the national level, making it vulnerable to major shocks. Dear viewers, it was precisely these intertwined advantages and disadvantages that helped the United States develop rapidly for many decades, but at the same time they gradually accumulated pressures that could not be resolved by the old ways. The fragmented system was once a source of strength for liberty, but as the country grew larger and more closely connected, it began to become a real barrier. As the state banking system reached its peak, profound changes in society and the economy began to turn those former advantages into burdens. The fragmentation that once promoted innovation gradually revealed itself to be an insurmountable barrier. The Industrial Revolution spread, requiring the flow of capital and payments to take place quickly and on a large scale across the territory. The rapidly developing interstate railroad network further highlighted the need for a universally accepted currency. The California gold rush of 1849 brought in a large amount of precious metals, but also caused intense price fluctuations. Urbanization occurred rapidly, and a stream of migrants constantly poured into new cities and frontier areas, deepening the division between regions, the industrial and financial North, the South relying on slave-based agriculture, and the aspirational West. Advances in transportation and communication made the problem even more complex. The birth of the telegraph helped information spread rapidly, but it also amplified panic and widespread speculation. A bad rumor in New York could shake banks on the frontier within just a few hours. Politically, the atmosphere also changed profoundly. The emerging Republican Party supported a stronger role for the federal government in national development. Meanwhile, the Jacksonian ideological legacy still held great influence in the South and West, where people still feared centralized banking and firmly supported hard money based on precious metals. The Panic of 1857 clearly exposed the weaknesses of the old system, but due to fierce political arguments, no comprehensive reforms were implemented. Conflict between factions became increasingly intense. The hard money faction, primarily Democrats in the South and West, feared inflation and the dominance of the financial elite. Conversely, the Whigs, who later became Republicans, along with the northern business community, pushed for the expansion of credit and paper money to support growth. Monetary fragmentation was not just a symptom of regional division, it became a cause that widened that gap. A nation with thousands of different currencies could hardly maintain true economic and political cohesion. Tensions gradually accumulated to the breaking point. Successive political crises, from the Bleeding Kansas events and the shocking Dred Scott ruling to the uprising of John Brown, combined with economic instability, pushed the country to the brink of secession. When the Southern states left the Union in 1860 and 1861, the fragmented monetary system was not just a legacy of the past, but became a serious barrier to the Lincoln administration's war efforts. Mobilizing resources, paying soldiers, and maintaining supply chains on a national scale became extremely difficult when each region still used its own separate currencies with uncertain values. It was in those life-and-death circumstances that the pressure reached its peak. The system that was once designed to protect local liberty and democracy had now become a threat to the survival of the Union itself. An inevitable turning point in history was approaching. When the fragmented monetary system became a direct barrier to the survival of the Union, history was forced to write a new chapter. It was a decisive moment where urgent wartime needs clashed with long-held principles of financial liberty. In late 1861, under the heavy pressure of the Civil War, large banks and the federal government were forced to suspend the redemption of gold and silver. Just a few months later, on the 25th of February 1862, Congress passed the Legal Tender Act. This was a historical turning point for the first time. The federal government issued national banknotes, known as greenbacks, or United States notes. Initially, $150 million. The amount later increased to approximately $450 million. This was the first form of fiat currency recognized as legal tender for most transactions, except for specific payments, such as import duties and interest on public debt. Exactly 1 year later, on the 25th of February 1863, President Abraham Lincoln signed the National Currency Act, also known as the National Banking Act. The vote in the Senate was extremely close, with 23 votes in favor and 21 against. The main architects of the act were Secretary of the Treasury Salmon Chase and Senator John Sherman of Ohio. Under this act, nationally chartered banks were required to purchase government bonds and deposit them at the newly established Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. In return, they were permitted to issue national banknotes with a unified design valued at up to 90% of the value of the deposited bonds. These banknotes were printed by the government and accepted nationwide. In 1864, the act received important amendments. By 1865, Congress imposed a 10% tax on banknotes issued by state banks. The effect was powerful. Most state banknotes quickly disappeared from circulation. Many state banks chose to convert into national banks to survive. This process was not smooth. Salmon Chase was the primary leader, but he and the legislators debated fiercely regarding constitutionality and the risks of inflation. In fact, the value of greenbacks once dropped to only about 35 cents against gold, causing widespread concern. President Lincoln signed the act despite his own significant hesitation. Opponents worried that these acts violated states' rights, created a monopoly for national banks, and opened the door to uncontrollable inflation. However, behind these emergency wartime decisions lay a deeper motive. This was not merely a temporary solution to pay soldiers and purchase weapons. It was also an aspiration to build a nation truly unified in its economy and politics. The results appeared quickly and clearly. Hundreds of national banks were established in just a short time. National banknotes and greenbacks soon became the primary means of payment, almost completely eliminating the chaotic discounting of the past. Although wartime inflation did occur, the new system helped the Union mobilize resources far more effectively than the secessionists whose Confederate currency fell into a much more disastrous state of devaluation. Dear viewers, through this turning point, we clearly see that crises are sometimes the most powerful catalysts for institutional change. What was once considered sacred local power and the fear of a centralized bank had to give way to the need for survival and the vision of a unified America. After that historical turning point, American finance was never the same. The old system gradually gave way to a new order where the federal government played a more significant role than ever, marking the transition from a fragmented nation to a truly unified economy. The central government now exercised tighter oversight through the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. National banks had to follow strict regulations and deposit government bonds, thereby contributing to making public debt a part of the money supply. As a result, a true national financial market emerged with banknotes accepted equally from the East Coast to the West Coast. The dual banking model, having both national banks and state banks, still exists today, reflecting a delicate balance between central and local power. The journey continued with important milestones. In 1873, the Coinage Act shifted the nation decisively toward a de facto gold standard. In 1879, the Specie Resumption Act allowed greenbacks to be exchanged back into gold at full face value. However, a series of financial crises still occurred in 1873, 1893, and notably in 1907. These events eventually led to the creation of the Federal Reserve System in 1913, closing the national banking era and opening a new chapter of modern central banking. Let us look back at the distinct differences between the two systems. The old system was highly decentralized, encouraging fierce competition and flexibility at the local level. It promoted an entrepreneurial spirit, but also led to serious fragmentation, vulnerability to fraud, and increased regional inequality. Conversely, the new system brought unity with a standardized banknote design, making it much easier to mobilize wartime capital and later develop the economy. Transcontinental trade became more stable and efficient. However, financial power gradually shifted toward Washington and large banks, especially in New York, accompanied by the increasingly clear risk of the politicization of money. This change carried a deeper meaning than what appeared on the surface. Public trust gradually shifted from the individual reputation of each local bank, or the intrinsic value of gold and silver, toward faith in the nation, specifically the solvency and creditworthiness of the federal government. This was a key turning point in American federalism, shifting from a model of loosely associated states to a nation-state capable of strongly shaping its economy. These changes laid a solid foundation for post-Civil War industrialization, contributing to the United States rising to the position of an economic superpower. At the same time, it paved the way for major reforms during the Progressive Era and the later New Deal. However, the cost was not small. The financial autonomy of local areas was significantly reduced. What was once a symbol of democratic liberty had to give way to efficiency and national unity. This was a historical trade-off, imperfect but necessary, in the context of a divided and rebuilding country. Dear viewers, through this transformation, we clearly see that currency is not just a tool for exchange, but a vivid symbol of how a nation defines itself between liberty and order, between local and central authority. From a fragmented system that was risky yet full of vitality, the United States transformed into a unified monetary order under the pressure of history. Now, looking back at the entire journey, we realize the most profound lesson: monetary design is never just a technical matter. It always reflects and shapes how power is balanced in a republic. The Founding Fathers and the Jacksonian spirit placed top priority on preventing the concentration of power. They were willing to accept inefficiency and the risks of fragmentation to protect individual liberty and states' rights. Conversely, the practical needs of a vast economy demanded close coordination and stable payments. The solution in 1863 was not a perfect plan drawn up in advance, but a wise hybrid product born from an existential crisis. The Civil War accelerated a process that peacetime politics had obstructed for many years. We can fairly evaluate this change. On the positive side, a unified currency became a vital foundation that contributed to the rise of the United States as a global economic superpower. It promoted long-term growth, integrated the domestic market, and strengthened national cohesion after years of division. However, the price paid is also clear. Local financial autonomy was reduced, simultaneously opening up new risks related to political intervention and money. Perhaps without the brutal Civil War, the United States could have found more peaceful, subtle reforms at the state level or other intermediary solutions. Today, those historical lessons remain fully relevant. As we debate central bank digital currencies, a form of even greater centralization, or stablecoins and cryptocurrencies which bear many similarities to the old free banking era history, reminds us to be cautious. The debate over the independence of the Federal Reserve, from political pressure over returning to the gold standard, or over the relationship between large banks and local banks, all are echoes from the past. Trust in currency is inherently fragile. It is not based on gold or printed paper, but on solid institutions, the right incentives, and a shared story of national value. In a context of deepening polarization, a trusted and unified currency is the invisible glue that holds a country together. Dear viewers, understanding this journey is not merely academic. It is the responsibility of every citizen in a democracy. We need to maintain transparent oversight of monetary regulatory institutions, fully aware that every financial system is a social contract reflecting our choices about liberty, fairness, and stability. Next time you hold a $20 bill with the portrait of Abraham Lincoln, pause for a moment. Remember that it took a bloody civil war and razor-thin votes in Congress for that piece of paper to have equal value from one coast to the other. Constant vigilance regarding how we design and redesign our currency is in fact vigilance over the very future of the Republic. History rarely repeats itself exactly, but it often rhymes to familiar melodies. The question remains intact and urgent. What kind of money will we trust, and who will be the ones to decide the rules? You have accompanied us through the entire series on the American monetary journey. If these analyses have provided you with deep insights and food for thought, please leave a sincere like and subscribe to the Financial State Secrets channel today so you do not miss the next interesting historical stories. Thank you very much. See you in the next video.